All right, good evening all. My name is ZM Wise, your host. Welcome to the second Wednesday reading series here at Art of Coffee. Thank you very much to Art of Coffee for letting us use their space. Zoe Emery is a writer, musician, artist, and stand-up comic. In 2018, July, she published her first poetry book, Catharsis, under the pseudonym Zoe Emery, and she will be releasing an album entitled Eros under the same pseudonym on Halloween of this year. She is also working on a second poetry book and a collection of short stories and essays, which she hopes to have finished by 2021. Yours for the taking, Zoe Emery. Come on.
So I'm going to read some old stuff and then some new stuff. I blame my achalasia for my chronic acrasia. In the mirror, all I see is elephantian from Fantasia. My amnestic repression rivals that of Anastasia, and by Anastasia, I'm referring to the cartoon variation. In real life, she was killed with the rest of the room in of assassination. Sorry, just a tangent, but that song, Once Upon a December, always reminds me of something I'm not sure I want to remember, but for someone terrified of fire, I sure love playing with its embers. I am constantly conscious of my own self-destruction, yet annoyed when encountered by even the slightest interruption. To the thoughts that spiral in repetition like a fucking broken record, I dissect and distort the tune into a cacophonous bastardization of what was once such a pure fascination. But when does reminiscence rot into rumination? When do sentiments submit to suicidal ideation? When will I asphyxiate on my own absurd aspirations? Like Sisyphus, I roll the boulder up the mountain, resentfully resigned to the fact that I must watch it tumble down again, and again, and again. But while this routine is torturous in its banality, the only alternative is accepting the chaos of reality. I should probably stop assigning everything so much sad symbolism. It's absurd to still seek meaning after embracing absurdism. But I like to stay up late philosophizing on how we're all just empty prisms. And I like to document my descent into functional alcoholism by collecting the empty wine bottles as memorabilia. And if I ever change my name, I'd change it to Ophelia, who, if you're not familiar with Shakespeare, is that crazy bitch in Hamlet who drowns herself. And what I find funny is that the name Ophelia means help, which is oh so fitting because I like to help everyone but myself. Wow, now I'm just making this all about me, but what else is new though, am I right? I mask my narcissism with self-deprecating comedy. But you know what? Sorry. Bear with me for a moment while I rant about mythology. It just pisses me off that Narcissus gets painted as the epitome of vanity when he's really the most accurate depiction of humanity, because we're all just staring blankly into our reflections, trying to reconcile what we see with our notions of perfection, trying to find ourselves somewhere deep in that bleak abyss, so we drown ourselves in ourselves, just like Narcissus. Sorry, another tangent, but it still needed to be said. Knowing I can never escape this shell instills immense existential dread. And speaking of shells, they're the garden on which I tread. The unstable foundation for walls laden with lead. My blood burns like wine, my body crumbles like bread. But it's whatever, I guess, right? It's all just in my head. No one ever really died from just wishing they were dead, so I've given up on Zoloft to try Xanax instead. I engraved my epitaph into the headboard of my bed, and I etched a disclaimer into my forehead so I can't be held accountable for anything left unsaid. If only uncertainty incited euphoria. If only I could relish in ineluctable aporia. Disorder can be fun if dealt in small doses, but it's a little more daunting when it's a diagnosis. That's called acrasia. It's a Greek word meaning a weakness of will. This next one is called kleos. It's a Greek word meaning, it's this old ancient concept of, glory. 1 pill, 2 pill, red pill, blue pill. They make me ill, but I take them still. Dangling off the ledge of my windowsill, I guess I've got too much time to kill. But I'm not really trying to kill myself. I'm just trying to fill myself with something that can instill some sense of peace. And maybe I should break my lease or break my neck. Slavoj Žižek said I already am eating from the trash can all the time. And that's how I feel as I write this rhyme. I'm dumpster diving just to pass the time, scavenging for some new paradigm. I'm already pretty sure that I've passed my prime, so optimism often seems asinine. But I also know that it would bore me if I just jumped from the second story. That'd be a pretty anticlimactic end to the sick and twisted children's story. Did I mention that I write children's stories? They're a socially acceptable form of regression, a respectable outlet for my pent of aggression. I can manifest a million metaphors for depression without giving off the wrong impression. My apartment complex has nice amenities, but I still have this complex, like Parmenides personally prescribed my personalities. My life has been written by Sophocles, but I want the love described by Aristophanes. I want to end my life like Socrates, Brew me a cup of hemlock tea and make it sweeter than a honeybee. Bees only sting out of self-defense to defend their hive at their own expense, and I guess that's a glorious way to go. I desire the death of the Greek hero. Okay, 2 more old ones and then some newer ones. My mother often tells me that I need to compartmentalize, to separate and organize, to numb myself and synthesize some semblance of normalcy, to sanitize my various visceral reactions to external and internal stimuli, to plaster on a pleasant disguise of Vaseline smiles and mascaraed eyes, and while I know that she can empathize, or at least attempt to sympathize, I still don't want to compromise the emotions I overanalyze. Because as soon as I compartmentalize, everything becomes depersonalized, and while everything is categorized into boxes titled classified, they're on attic shelves trying to hide, covered with dust and duct tape lies, stacked between false alibis for the crimes I'm determined to deny. I can't be left to my own devices without falling into existential crisis, but even if I can't overcome my vices, at least they're all compartmentalized. For what it's worth, my mother at least addresses her neurosis. My father, on the other hand, represses and regresses in reverse metamorphosis. He's a snake trying to fit into skin that he's outgrown. He's crowned himself with calluses, and resentment is his throne. You're just like your father, my mother often tells me. So I've established between us a distinct dichotomy. I've organized my life to be his antithesis. I'd much rather emulate Atlas over Sisyphus. Atlas was doomed to hold the world upon his shoulders, while Sisyphus spent each day rolling up the same boulder just to watch it tumble down again, and Sisyphus was just a man, but Atlas was a titan. He could have thrown the world off his back at any time, and yet he didn't. Why didn't he? Sisyphus obviously had no choice in his fate. The only options in Tartarus are ruminate or dissociate, but Atlas certainly must have chosen to bear the burden of the earth. Certainly he saw within the world something of worth. Why not just cast it off like the albatross it is? He could have relieved himself of the weight of our collective sins. He could have rejected responsibility without remorse or recompense. He could have feigned ignorance to our struggle out of arrogance. He could have even taken pleasure in our plights out of callousness, but Atlas was a titan, not a king like Sisyphus. He had no need to crown himself with cruel calluses. Carrying the world upon his shoulders was no punishment. Quite the contrary, I would argue. It was an accomplishment, a feat of responsibility, a testament to his devotion and humility, and how persistent he was in supporting the world in spite of all its vices, expecting nothing in return, no matter how enticing it might be to wallow in self-pity and resentment, but resentment is a throne for kings resistant of reflection. And maybe I spend too much time in a state of introspection, but at least I'm not a slave to denial and deflection. My father thinks his kingdom was founded on cursed soil. He never reaps the fruits of his labor, no matter how he toils. Perhaps he's just a serf within his own feudal system. Perhaps he's enslaved by his own conditions and symptoms. His attempts to escape peasantry will eventually leave him penniless, and then I guess he really will be just like Sisyphus, alone with his boulder on the abysmal hills of Tartarus. But at least he'll still be king, right? That's worth something, I guess. But his armor of alterity will never make him autonomous. I'd rather care too much and risk my independence than rule over a kingdom with no inhabitants. You're just like your father, my mother has always said. That's the phrase I hear the most, and it's the one that I most dread. So I refuse to listen to the Sisyphean voice inside my head, and now I vow to live my life like Atlas instead. This last one from the book. It's called Glinda the Good Witch. I wish I could have known Glinda a bit better. I bet she wasn't crazy whenever Billy met her. Maybe she lost it when she had my father. I'm sure postpartum depression made it much harder to cope with the abuse and medication misuse. I wonder if everyone acted obtuse as her grip on reality grew increasingly loose. Subconsciously, my father believes he's to blame. He's a living embodiment of congenital shame. When Summer Over the Rainbow plays, I still see his eye twitch, but I can't tell if it's a tear or just his Parkinson's. In spite of her psychosis, Glinda was a good witch. Denial and resentment can't douse this sentiment. Her eyes were Emerald City, but she slept in the poppy field, so my father cut out his heart and armed himself with a tin shield. A steadfast tin soldier, he burns with an eternal flame. He owns many possessions, but not his own name. There's Bill Sr., Bill Jr., and Bill III. They've measured their worth with the bills they've earned. But there's no magic slippers of ruby or silver, and no more yellow brick road gold standard, because Glinda is gone, and her emerald eyes too. With no hope of redemption, what's a tin man to do? Too cold to feel or too much of a coward, if he only had a brain that hadn't been soured by trauma, tragedy, and wicked time. I thought that comedy was tragedy plus time. But no one's laughing now in this deafening silence. Everyone vowed to forget the violence, and feign forgiveness for reconciliation, but forgiveness is empty without reparation. So grudges and guilt form the family's foundation. Glinda was haunted by hallucinations, and her ghost invokes immense vexation. So we only speak her name in times of desperation, in hushed voices, so as not to summon her. And we're careful not to force my father to remember. Repression is the oil that keeps him moving on, chopping down memories until they're all gone. He'll rust if he sheds a single tear, so he just keeps moving, out of shame and fear. He sees his tremors as a sign of weakness, because he's no longer a well-oiled machine. Beneath his shaky shell, he's completely helpless. As he cries, his eyes glimmer Glinda green. He hides because he's afraid to be seen. He's even afraid to see the wizard, because a heart has no place inside his armor. He keeps chopping away until his forest is bare. He's convinced himself that it's better not to care, but even when no one else is there, Glinda's ghost still haunts the air. So, that was old stuff, and now here's some slightly new stuff. I swear I must have swallowed the Atlantic, because my lungs drown in brine every time I panic, and the only way to reach any state of calm is to submit to the malevolent maelstrom and let her purge her salty wrath down my swollen cheeks, whispering to me sweetly that I'll never know peace. I wish my father and I could go swimming in the clouds painted on my childhood ceiling. Maybe then he'd see why my head's stuck up there, although I know at this point it's too late to care. I'll never learn how roses make wine the color of potted octopus ink, and peacock feathers float in candle wax melted over wax paper woven into waxy skin and skinny wax figures in a wax museum during a waxing crescent moon that will wane all too soon. I've got a history of being histrionic. My mind is morphing into myriad moronic but mellifluous melodies that lull me to sleep, just long enough for the reaper to weep, because he knows my soul is not his to keep. For I control death, I control destiny, though I know that notion is absolutely absurd, said the bird to the wriggling worm, whose squiggly body writhes and squirms like slithy toves that gyre and gimble in the wave, while I place a silver thimble on every finger to keep me nimble, and numb to the sensory stimuli that deafen my ears and dull my eyes, and burn my tongue and dumb my mind, and split my skin to peer inside, but look, there's nothing there to find. Alright, two more. Dionea muscipula, Venus flytrap, Musca domestica, common housefly. I decay and dissolve like an inky cap whenever you look me in the eye. The bee pollinates the flower, Eros blooms into fecundity. Yet Venus's petals are soured, Eros withers in virginity. Fly flits over to flirt with Venus, with flattering phrases to earn her trust, though she's not like others in her genus, so Fly's words will never be enough. He caresses only her atmosphere, for he's afraid his touch will incite fear. While Venus longs for Fly to enter, they both know he's not welcome here. She feeds upon vulnerability, but can't open herself to intimacy. So she traps every fly she sees, and begs and pleads, "Don't leave me, please." And for once, a fly decides to stay, of his own foolish accord. But he's wasting his time, Venus will say. She fulfills her prophecy of discord. His honeyed whispers too soft to pierce the aura, a futility that swarms around her like disorder, and no matter how thoughtful he is, or how much he cares, his gossamer wing grazes her trigger hairs, and in an instant, her lips are sealed before he's had the chance to tell her his secret. And this is the last one before I finally get away. Naps on the examination table. The IV is in my hand, and it is so uncomfortable. But I understand that discomfort indicates growth. At least that's what I hear myself mutter whenever I'm feeling quite queer, because in my right state of mind, my primary mode of being is content with resignation to my past and present mental situation. Self-awareness won't absolve me of the crimes committed against myself, but it sure is easy to forgive myself. Addicts crave structure, but construct routine around destruction, imposing order onto chaos, deriving order from chaos, recycling garbage, accomplishing nothing in the face of oblivion. Dialectic of enlightenment, delusional dictators of thought, I've stripped you of mythology, and while this doesn't make you ugly, I see you as reality, and reality is unsightly. I keep dreaming the impossible dream. The players change, but the play is the same. Quixotic quests down familiar roads. I'm sorry if I call you someone else's name. Eventually, I'll turn you all to toads. Everything blends into one never-ending story of a masochistic, narcissistic, self-pitying prick who wants nothing more than to make herself sick off of anything and anyone. She keeps thinking about getting a gun. God, why the fuck am I talking about myself in third person? Why do I narrate my experiences like I'm a fictional character? It's weird, and I should stop, she said to herself. It's just easier to tolerate my existence if I observe it from a distance, detached, dissociated. I feel my resentment somewhat placated. I'm an impressionist painting, but, not a good one. I think maybe I'll finally get a gun, but just like for safety purposes or whatever, like self-defense or some shit. You didn't think I meant I was gonna No, I won't be trying that again anytime soon. As a child, I often talked to the moon, because she just got me, you know? Not much for conversation, but a great listener, let me tell you. Sometimes I think that's all I want, someone to listen to me complain. I mean, that's what you're all doing right now, and it feels fucking awesome. Thank you for enduring me while I scream into the void. I spend so much time staring into the abyss that I fashion myself in its likeness, intriguing on the surface, and an okay place to visit, but no place to live in, no place for commitment, mysterious, enthralling, but utterly appalling beneath the marvelous masquerade of mystery. You'll find that it's completely empty, a devouring vacuum, eternally hungry, shifting focus, raindrops on windows induce apoplexy. I speak sincerely but over-complexly. Sensory overload, overwhelmed by color with no outlines. If I see Aurora Borealis with my own eyes, it will surely be my demise. And when I perish in the fields, the vultures will lap up ink and peck at nothing but parchment. That's all.
Nice.